I keep sitting down to make an intro for us, and
Oh yeah, we need
uh,
dramatic music, Paul.
yeah. I've never,
I think that's what's missing.
some kind of intrigue,
Yeah,
music,
like weeping
drama.
strings. I don't know, maybe
Okay,
something. I don't
okay,
know.
yeah.
I'm open minded.
All right, I've been working with. I recorded some clips of various, various stuff. Maybe yeah, mainly some jazz, but yeah, I was thinking of something more
Oh,
dramatic,
jazz. Yeah,
to
yeah,
like Rachmaninoff or something, But
yeah.
I don't know. We got to capture our spirit, and I'm not sure what the right music is for that.
I don't
So
know.
yeah, so I work on it. Everything just takes time,
Yep.
So hey, speaking of time, it's time once again for Teacher Talk with Paul and Jay, and this is episode. I don't know what number, but our episode is the episode on Book 9 of the Odyssey. If you're joining us again, we're glad to have you back. If you're joining us for the first time, we talk about books and about teaching books in high school, and we're glad you're here. And we'd love it if you'd like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it, YouTube or Spotify, iTunes, whatever it is. Jay and I think that from our own personal experience, that the best way to get better at this, besides doing it year after year with lots of students, is to talk to other teachers about it. Jay's a great friend maker with lots of different teachers from around. And I don't know, I'm not that good at it, but I do like to visit lots of other schools and talk to other schools and see
Yeah.
what they're doing. And so we think of this podcast as some kind of combination of those two things. We'd love to interact with you in comments and maybe in person too. That would be fantastic. But as as fellow craftsmen in this art of teaching, this is the way we go about it, and this is the purpose of our podcast. Isn't that right, Jay?
Yeah, and this one, I mean, in the pantheon of like chapters of literature from Western literary history, this is
Yeah.
on a short list. So I'm guessing if this is the case for you, Paul, that like I was going through and figuring out like what do we glean, what do we focus on. So we're really with any of these, we're going to highlight things that stand out to us for our own personal reasons. But I mean, by necessity, we have to leave stuff out. Otherwise, it would be a million podcasts for the Odyssey.
Yes. Yeah, we're
Um,
already probably doing too many, on the
no such
Odyssey.
thing. But no, but this is for lots of reasons having to do with the context of where Odysseus is in his life right now.
Yes.
This is a transitional set of moments, right? The beginning of his story
Right.
to the Phaeacians. So
Right.
we
Right.
start with a poem, Paul, and I unearthed a really good one that I just was introduced to today. So do you mind if I share it?
No, I think that'd be great as long as you can control yourself a little bit this time. Last
Yeah,
time
well,
you got all that bad
I get
feedback.
racy sometimes. I'm my mother's kid. So
Yeah, give it to
this
us. What do
is
you got?
a poem by Louise Gluck. And it's a poem. So if you just search for poems inspired by Homer, it's amazing what's out there.
Hmm. Hmm.
But this is one of the best ones I've read. It's called Parable of the Hostages by Louise Gluck. So I'll read it. The Greeks are sitting on the beach, wondering what to do when the war ends. No one wants to go home, back to that bony island. Everyone wants a little more of what there is in Troy. More life on the edge, that sense of every day as being packed with surprises. But how to explain this to the ones at home, to whom fighting a war is a plausible excuse for absence, whereas exploring one's capacity for diversion is not? Well, this can be faced later. These are men of action, ready to leave insight to the women and children.
Hmm.
Thinking things over in the hot sun, pleased by a new strength in their forearms, which seem more golden than they did at home. Some begin to miss their families a little, to miss their wives, to want to see if the war has aged them. And a few grow slightly uneasy. What if war is just a male version of dressing up, a game devised to avoid profound spiritual questions? Ah, but it wasn't only the war. The world had begun calling them, an opera beginning with the war's loud chords and ending with the floating aria of the sirens.
Hmm.
There on the beach, discussing the various timetables for getting home, No one believed it could take 10 years to get back to Ithaca. No one foresaw that decade of insoluble dilemmas. O unanswerable affliction of the human heart, how to divide the world's beauty into acceptable and unacceptable loves. On the shores of Troy, how could the Greeks know? They were hostages already. Who once delays the journey is already enthralled. How could they know that of their small number, some would be held forever by the dreams of pleasure, some by sleep, some by music?
What's what was the poet's last name again? Louise
Gluck's Gluck with an umlaut over the U. And it's
Gluck.
Parable of the Hostages. I don't know. I just
Parable of
thought
the
it was a really
Hostage.
great poem.
I've never Googled, poems about the Odyssey, and it's amazing. Yeah, the one you brought last episode was fantastic,
Yeah.
poignant and funny. Um, and this one too, just the reflection, the time artists are spending on this work and
Yep.
what they're pulling out of it, reflecting and living in the dynamics of this story.
Yeah.
It's fantastic
Well, I
to
guess
hear.
the first one that I know of, I mean, aside from translations, but the sort of quasi fan fiction of Keats's On First Looking into Chapman's Homer, and then
Yeah,
Tennyson's Ulysses is another one. Those are the big ones in like the canon, right, Paul? But then you
right.
look, and this isn't going away. Like these are contemporary poems, and we're still wrestling with all these things, you know. So if you ever need an argument, I mean, there's all kinds of music inspired by the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's all kinds of poetry. So I just think that's interesting. This stuff does not go away, and as you and I have talked about, people like Madeline Miller, who wrote Circe and Song of Achilles, people like
Yeah,
Emily Wilson, who are just translating Iliad and Odyssey again. This woman, Natalie Haynes, who I recommended to you before. I mean, this stuff is alive. Like people are still thinking deeply about these things.
yes, and if it's still speaking back, if it's inspiring artists, people who are writers and poets, then that's meaningful. That means something, and to me, that's one of the most legitimate definitions of a canonical work. It's that it's not usually you hear that term and you think of it as a backward looking term, but it's not. If it's only backwards, then yeah, you're just living in the dead past.
Yep.
It's not the best meaning of it. It
Right.
means it means classic means better, that it's vital now,
Right.
and people are making works about it. I was
No, we have
surprised by the last word of that poem, Jay. Why'd she say music? That was the last word. I thought in my head I finished the line with death, but
right. I know.
but
I
music.
was thinking a conversation my son. This is relevant. I promise. Not everything I say in class or on the podcast is relevant. Most isn't, but this. So my son and I were driving, and he got into classic rock. I think via Stranger Things, he got into stuff from the '80s, which made me happy.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
he was just chatting about like what was it like, you know, when you grew up then. And then I was reminded of something Zadie Smith said about Victorian novels, and she said that
yeah,
something like 99 or 95% of Victorian novels are out like are out of print. So it isn't as if
yeah,
stuff was. I bet there was tons of stories from ancient Greece that stunk. Like we had time has done all this
yeah.
sifting for us, and we have what remains. The same with classic rock. There was a lot of other stuff in the '70s coming out. We don't listen to it.
Yeah, no,
You
no.
know what I mean? So
Yeah, there was a lot of garbage. It's true.
yeah,
It's true. And it's
yeah,
not good just because it's old and
right.
and tons and tons. If we only knew how much just got flushed down the toilet of time.
Yeah, it's
And
interesting to think about.
yeah, and I bet it's the same percentages, I mean,
Yep,
approximately speaking, across time.
absolutely.
It wasn't better then, necessarily. It
Hmm.
just wasn't. But that's a great example, of a poet still being inspired by this. And I think you and I too, in our art or craft of teaching, that's sort of what we feel in this. We feel inspiration in the classroom,
Yeah,
and I ask myself that anew every time. Is it so? Should I be teaching this book? In front of the faces of the kids who are in front of me this
yep,
year, I want to ask that question. Ask that question again. Is it true? And try to hear the right answer. And I
yeah,
hope I'd be open to saying, you know what, it's not. It's time to go. If it were, so
yeah. That's awesome.
All right, let's dig into book 9. Book 9, if you don't know, is the book of the Cyclops, the story of the Cyclops. As Jay
Hmm.
said, this is a core canonical
Yeah.
episode in a canonical book. If you open any table of contents of some survey literature textbook, it's probably going to be excerpted in
Yep.
there. And in fact, a lot of teachers, several teachers I've met who say they teach the Odyssey, really just teach book 9 of the Odyssey. So it gets hit a lot. So maybe we can talk a little bit about why that is so. But I'd like to carry on with our normal scheme, which is
Yep.
we sort of try to open up with what's obvious and crucial, obvious and important. Is that what we
Yep.
say? And then what's a subtle but meaningful kind
Yep.
of thing, and then what our lingering questions are from this
Yeah.
chapter. And I had several. I have to just settle on one, I guess.
Oh, I
Um,
know.
but
Do you
but
want to
it
just quickly summarize book 9?
yes,
Um,
yeah. Let's do that. I kind of laid that
okay.
out a little bit. Book 9 launches
Well,
a series here of chapters that's going to go from book 9, book 10, book 11, book 12
yep.
are all going to be taken up. It's roughly 80 pages, not quite 100 pages, I think, of storytelling in which Odysseus is going to go back in time and tell the Phaeacians
Yep.
how he got here. How it is that he's on their island, how he met Nausicaa, how he's come to need a ride home, and thankfully been
Yep.
promised a ride home tomorrow morning. They're going to just drive him home, and he'll be back, so to speak.
Yep.
So it's going to take him 80 pages to tell this tale. In book 9, we get sort of the first 3 episodes, the
Yep.
first 3 stops on the journey back home. The Ciconians, the Lotus Eaters, and then the most memorable, the Cyclops.
Mhm.
And so these are the first 3 stops when he still has all of his men. At least by the first stop, he loses some of the first stop, and then he's going to lose more by the end of the book.
Mhm.
And so that kicks off the storytelling. So he's got the microphone. Demodocus had been singing the Phaeacians, singing
Yep.
Lord, and he's the one who was telling the story so well of the fall of Troy that Odysseus was crying, and so Odysseus outs himself and says, "Well, first, let me tell you who I am.
Yeah.
What's my name?" And he gets that out there. So that's sort of the overview of the book and the scope of it. Takes you from leaving Troy to that first stop to them booking it out to sea to get away from the
Mm.
Cyclops, who's trying to kill him and coming pretty close to doing it. They're right at the end. Is that a fair sort of summary, Jay, of what's going on here?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the context because I think we can forget. You and I would never forget, but other people, Paul. No, I think we could forget.
Lesser teachers, yes,
We could forget the dramatic situation. This isn't a
yeah,
drama, but thinking about it dramatically is really important and rhetorically because Odysseus is a stranger. He's in a somewhat precarious position in a foreign place, surrounded by strangers that he needs to protect him and feed him.
yeah,
And so I always ask students, what sort of stories do you think he's going to highlight? And what sorts of stories do you think he's going to leave out? He doesn't start at the beginning of his life. He starts at the end of the war. That's interesting. He doesn't
right,
start, I was born, you know, 6 pounds, 7 ounce. Like he doesn't say that.
right,
So that's interesting. He usually throughout the epic, and we're getting ahead, but carefully curates information. He openly lies numerous times.
yeah,
And it just seems like he's not doing that here. So anyway, I don't think in book 9 we have to have definitive answers about why he's doing things. We just met him in book 5, but that context piece I think is really really important. That he's not super safe if he
right.
says certain things. Like he's beholden to the people he's talking to in a very specific way, and so I think that's important to be mindful of.
It's
So I'm
good,
glad
and
you mentioned
it's good to point it out to students because you learn it later. Later in the book, you learn what kind of a storyteller he is, or you learn it as you go along, better and better. When you hear him craft tales, and then I'm thinking of when he's back on. Spoiler alert: when he makes it back to Ithaca, and he starts telling a story for the sole purpose of getting a blanket because it's cold.
Yep.
And so he's crafting this tale, and it's all kinds of BS. He's just stringing together. But the whole point is, and then that noble man gave me a blanket.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that something like that. Then you come to realize that he's doing that all the time, and you don't know that, you're not aware of that here to begin with. So
Right.
that's good. That's good to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he starts off telling his story. He does mention where he's from. He does talk about home, and talk about how dear it is and how much he wanted to get back there. And I think that plays, that plays through throughout the whole story. Mentions how he was stuck and how Kirke, who just couldn't get enough of him, and Calypso either, who was trying to hang on to him for a long time. And I always underline this line. It's my favorite line in this chapter. How Kirke the enchantress desired me and detained me in her hall, but in my heart I never consented. So I can't.
John Green, in his crash course video on the Odyssey, which is delightful, said that Odysseus swears that he was loyal in his heart, but it would have been better if he was loyal in his pants.
Yeah, exactly.
And then he corrects himself saying toga or something, but,
right.
Yeah,
but it's okay. I think of that line of I think Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy, he had that famous interview in Playboy magazine where he said he had committed adultery in his heart many times. And lusted after many women in his heart, but by implication, or I don't know if he explicitly said it. I just know the story is a story. He had never had adultery. In the flesh. And he's essentially. It seems like it was okay for him to tell that story because it was okay in a sense, to have adultery in your heart, as long as you're not going around actually doing it. Odysseus says the opposite.
Yeah.
He had adultery in the flesh, but he never, but not in his heart. And he's okay. He's absolved, by that. And I think if that's one of the many little openings, if, when you're looking for them, for the differences between sort of the Greek morality and Hebrew Judeo-Christian sort of morality. This is one great example of it. I think he tells it out loud, like you're talking about what he's crafting to tell them. He's like, whoa, don't think that I actually had adultery, with her in my heart. I only did it in my body,
Right.
And that was important to get that out there. So anyway, that's interesting to start off. But why don't you start off with the structure? Do you have what our so let's go to our obvious, essential sort of material. What do you got?
So, I may have overthunk this, but
I think you probably
my
did.
obvious passage, I went rogue and went with a not obvious. So my obvious passage is a few snippets of quotations that have to do with the question, is Polyphemus evil? Because I actually don't think it's self-evident.
Whoa. What?
Yeah. The whole chapter is predicated on him being kind of a stock villain. He eats men raw, which to the ancient Greeks is a particular sign of barbarism.
Because you're supposed to cook them first.
You have to cook, yeah. We like our men medium rare.
Jay, he doesn't care for the gods.
Well, that to me is complicated. Let me just read a couple of things.
All right.
I have on 336. This is Emily Wilson, but I think there's 4 interesting things about Polyphemus that are objectively described. The first is that he does his chores in a patterned, predictable, sort of civilized way.
That's right.
And I'll read a little quote. The second one is when he calls for help, his neighbors clearly care for him. Third is he treats his animals with attentive care and affection, and even blindly pets his sweet ram, which is kind of adorable.
And talks
even
to it.
Though he speaks ill of Zeus, which generally is bad, without farming, the gods provide for him and the other cyclopses. They clearly provide for him. Mm-hmm. So the other thing, well, I'll read these little passages just to illustrate signs of goodness. I don't think he's, Mother Teresa. I don't think he's one-dimensional. I think this passage is actually pretty deceptive. So in 336,
wow. I did not expect you to say this at all, Jay.
I'm throwing curveballs at you, Paul.
And hang on, before you go into it, when you say the gods clearly are taking care of them, what are you referring to?
Oh, well, he has plenty of food and drink and shelter. He has everything he needs.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. Fine. All right, but go
So
ahead. Go ahead.
at evening, he drove back his woolly flocks into the spacious cave, both male and female, and left none in the yard outside. Perhaps suspecting something, or perhaps a god told him to do it, he picked up and placed the stone to form a door, sat to
Yeah.
milk the sheep and bleating goats. Chores were done. So that's a sign that he's running a little civilized, mini community. And on
Right.
402, again, this is my 402. Um, his neighbors, when he called out, said, Polyphemus, what's the matter? Are you badly hurt? Why are you screaming through the holy night and keeping us awake? Is someone stealing your herds? So he's built something like a community. And I just
Right.
want to offer like a couple of things. Odysseus is telling the story here. We're getting it through his lens. What I'm wondering about is presuming hospitality or Xenia, which Odysseus clearly does. He just blindly takes this guy's stuff. Is
Yeah.
presuming Xenia in stealing from a host as evil in the poem as a host not offering Xenia to a stranger. I don't think Polyphemus, is it Polyphemus or Polyphemus? I'm not sure which.
I always say Polyphemus, so I'm
Okay,
with you on that.
if
Yeah.
we don't know what would have happened if Odysseus behaved like a good Greek, which he hardly ever does, and basically asked for Xenia. We don't know what would have happened. He doesn't give Polyphemus the chance. He just steals his stuff.
Right. I mean,
And
he does ask
Polyphemus
for
was
it, but
minding his own.
he
Yeah,
does ask it after he's already dug in a little.
yeah.
Which he
Polyphemus behaves, I mean, like a good Greek. I mean, he's minding his own business as this chapter begins, right? And he's infiltrated by this stranger. So I don't know. I think the moral status of these characters are both complicated. Odysseus does amazing things to survive these moments that are heroic.
Right.
Odysseus
Right.
also steals. You know,
Yes. Yeah, they did
um,
dig in. That did bother. I'll go with you down that path, and I did wonder about that. Did they create? Did they commit some kind of solecism or something by by doing that? Not that I kind of stop in that Polyphemus is not a pious person, so does he really care? Is he keeping count? He's not saying in his head, "Oh well, this justifies me dashing 3 of these guys' brains out and eating them because they didn't ask first before they dug into the
yeah.
cheese." But I do
I just
wonder if they should have done that.
Yeah, so what I'm putting out there now, and I would just suggest this for readers of this poem that are new. We're like a third of the way in. So I wouldn't feel any pressure having complete clarity about anything, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting to think about what the main characters in books believe as distinguished from what the book itself believes. I know what Odysseus believes because he's talking to me right now. But I just wonder when we're thinking about what's good in the book and what's evil in the book.
Yes.
Odysseus does things here that are good. He makes wise, clever choices to protect his men. He doesn't kill the Cyclops before the Cyclops moves the rock, like all that stuff.
Right.
He
Right.
also does things that are objectively evil. So it isn't like stealing, and Polyphemus is the same way. There's all kinds of things he does that are civilized and good, and he eats people raw. Like it's good and bad. So I just wonder if there's a distinction between what Odysseus believes and what the poem believes.
Do you believe in Odysseus's piety? Would you distinguish him from Polyphemus in that sense? Like, well, at least he believes and respects the gods, Odysseus? Or do you not
Yeah,
buy
I mean,
that?
I think, well, to widen the context of the question, I think the poem has a really complicated approach to piety because it's literally an impossibility because the gods don't agree. So the minute you're pious to Poseidon, you're not pious to Athena. So I'm not sure what piety means really. I guess
Right.
it means being respectful of the god that's taking care of you specifically, even if that means screwing over other ones.
Right,
That's
which is literally what happens in this chapter.
yeah, yeah,
At the
yeah,
end, before
yeah,
they leave, they sacrifice the rams of Polyphemus, or the ram of Polyphemus that got him out the door to Zeus. Zeus does not accept the sacrifice, according to
yeah,
Odysseus, and Polyphemus calls down a curse, which essentially comes true,
yep,
by his father Poseidon. So, yeah, what was the right move there? In the world of the gods, not
yeah.
clear, not clear.
Is Odysseus pious? Is a great. I mean,
Yeah.
And at which moment is he pious raping and pillaging the Cicones after just landing there and they're totally innocent, or is that just what soldiers do?
Well, they're
Um,
sort of innocent. In the Iliad, they are said to have sided with the Trojans, so they're the bad guys. Jay,
no, I
they
know,
deserve to be
but
pillaged,
this isn't a
murdered.
fight. He gets blown off course there by wind. They're again like Polyphemus. The Cicones are people minding their own business.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Um, that's true, and uh, yeah, that's a piece of the story, and they kind of pay for that too. It doesn't really come out well.
yeah. He
For the
loses 72 guys to them.
Yeah, right. They fight all day on the beach, right,
Yeah.
until they're just driven out, and men start dying. Um, yeah, it's an interesting take. You know, I take the Cyclops. I think there's some there's some moments strangely where they're dimensionalized, as you know, as you're sort of saying, or Polyphemus is dimensionalized. You know, I think especially at the end when he's blind and his eyeball is oozing on the ground and he's losing and he's talking to his little sheep, his little ram. Why are you holding back in the back of the gate? You usually go out first, little guy.
Right.
Are you? He's like,
Yeah.
"Are you upset because Daddy's eyes poked out?"
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like he's literally he literally asked him that in my translation. It's
Yep.
you know it's a little tender there, but
Yeah.
his total scoffing, open mockery of the gods or mockery of Odysseus's men, you know, request for kindness or hospitality is and then you know his gross violence and just
Mhm.
thuggishness. I don't know. It's pretty easy to just write him off, like you say, as just sort of a blackguard, you know, like
Right.
classic bad guy or something.
But curiously, I think the same of Odysseus, that if you're not careful, he
Mm.
can very easily be written off as a one-dimensional villain. I mean, he calls himself in the beginning of the address to the Phaeacians, I'm known for my lying and trickery. I mean, I find it
Yeah,
strange that he just comes out and says that. Is
yeah,
he that confident in his strength and charisma that he can come out and look at an audience and say, I'm a liar, but listen to me for 100 pages? I mean,
yeah.
that's amazing, right?
And
So,
it says formidable for guile, lying,
yeah,
trickery in peace and in war.
right.
Not just when you have an excuse because we're
Yeah,
we're being attacked or something
yep.
like that.
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
neat.
and again, I think to that difference in in moral systems or ethical evaluations, it's not something he has to hide. Clearly, it's not
Yeah,
something he has to sort of sugarcoat in any
right.
way because he could because he's telling the story and he doesn't.
Yeah.
So it seems to belong to what I think of this what I think of as and I guess maybe the overarching thing I would say about the the whole book of the reason why it's great is because it's a great humanist story. It's a great humanist tale. All as we've sort of said in different ways, all of being human, essentially is in here in one
Mhm.
way or another. And it's not just one thing or another. It's not just victory or defeat. It's not just pride or humility. It's not
Right.
it's not just virtue or vice. It's all of those things. Throw them all
Yeah.
throw them all in there, and they're in this character and the story. I think one of the ways you resolve the fact that you can't resolve what the gods want is that the book's not about the gods. Really, the book's about man. The book's about humanity.
Mhm.
It's really about Odysseus, and that's man's state. They're not really sure
Yep.
what God wants. You're always trying
Yeah.
to work that out. And
I
so
guess
that puts you back on Odysseus over and over and over again. So
yeah.
it's a humanist story, a humanist tale in that sense.
No, and
So
that's
that's your obvious. The obvious is that Polyphemus might not be such a bad guy.
I think the obvious thing to me is the fact that Homer never gives us stick figures. He gives us morally complicated
There it is.
creatures. Polyphemus, by the way, is
Yeah.
an anthropos. He's a man like Odysseus. So his complexity is
Yeah.
equally interesting as Odysseus is.
Yeah.
And I just think I don't think the book would work. I don't think the chapter would work if Polyphemus was a one-dimensional villain. Nor do I think Odysseus would be that interesting if he was like what a lot of the 18th century translators, a guide to human behavior. I mean, man, I don't think so. I mean, read the book for God's sake.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so I just think we're given complexity, and I appreciate that. Like it's honest and complex. It isn't a children's story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With black and white
Yes.
characters.
and that's and that's great, and it's true. It's just true, and I think it's good of you to point that out, even in a place where you think it might not exist.
Hmm.
That there's subtlety there, and I think there's even more subtlety. It's part of one of my questions, really. Actually, um, okay.
What's your obvious, Paul?
My obvious is a little more on the obvious side, I think, which is Odysseus is a guide to moral behavior, and you should follow everything he says. No, no, it is not. It is not that. It is that this chapter, maybe, in reading through it and thinking about why is this one of the most, you and I think have always taught the book basically cover to cover. Sometimes I haven't quite done that. I've skipped the middle sometimes and done the Telemachy and then skipped to the end when father, son, and grandfather all come together. So I've done versions of that, but mainly we teach the whole thing. So I don't think about this in terms of like what's the most excerptable part of this of this book. But in trying to take on that question and looking at this chapter, maybe in isolation for this podcast, I think for me the obvious is that in this book we're given a portrayal, and maybe in a way, like if you did have to choose one book, that's not a bad one to choose for getting a strong sense of Odysseus's character. I think a great deal, maybe all, maybe you push that and trying to write an essay, maybe all of the basic elements of Odysseus's character come out, and emerge, here in this chapter. You certainly see a great deal of it. So he's put on the page in that way. Last episode, we talked about spiritedness, this thumos, and this chapter is packed with it. You see that in each of his three stops. His first stop as a raider warrior against, I don't know why he did that, why he raided, and stole and enslaved the women and all the things that are mentioned in that. But it seems like a matter of course, maybe it was because they were seen as enemies, as they sided with the Trojans. Maybe that's just what you do as a Greek when you're running home. That's something Emily Wilson could tell us. I'm sure. But you see that spiritedness in that. They stop on the line and they just get to work. Then in the next stop with the Lotus Eaters, this one is an interesting chapter. I think maybe some interesting things have been made of, but whatever this Lotus thing is, it's some kind of drug that makes people forget about hearth and home and about carrying on. And maybe it's some connection has been made between this and like Pilgrim's Progress, which is like many stories, kind of a ripoff of the Odyssey, of the Slough of Despond. This is sort of that despondency you fall into in the Christian, sort of context. It's through the knowledge of your sin and your guilt that you just fall into despair. It's kind of despair, which kind of interestingly follows after, pillaging, plundering, and raping. And maybe that Lotus Eater thing sort of works in that way. But Odysseus doesn't want to stay. He goes and physically grabs and takes his men back and chains one of them, at least, to the boat, and says, "We got to get out of here, man. You can't stay here. You'll forget about home." And so he keeps that. So that drive to get back home, and be in that place he esteems most of all, that he says is a part of his character. And then you see in the actual episode with the Cyclops, his deadliness, really, the deadliness of his wit, the deadliness of his strength, and that he's a formidable foe. And this is the first time we actually see that. And so it's interesting that the Cyclops says, when he finds out, when Odysseus finally tells him his real name and tells him, "I'm Odysseus, raider of cities from Ithaca, and I'm the guy, who put your eye out." And then there's that strange line. I don't know how Emily Wilson translates it, but it's page 160 for me. Polyphemus says, "Now comes the weird upon me." And I looked that up. I think it just means prophecy, the prophecy. And he said there was a prophecy spoken of old that Odysseus would come and and poke out my eye. And this whole thing is coming true. But he said, I thought Odysseus would be, so all the time, late nights when Polyphemus couldn't get to sleep and he's laying there dreading his fate, he's picturing Odysseus as a totally different man. He goes, "You're this puny, scrawny little stick figure that showed up. I didn't even give you another thought." I thought he was going to be some big monstrous man who's going to take me down. Well, that's everybody who runs into Odysseus. They all underestimate him in some way or another,
Mm,
and that's why he always wins. So that side
yeah,
of Odysseus being dangerous too, I think is in this. So you see his daring, his pushing things over the edge. I think the whole reason they get into this thing, his men say, "Let's take some cheese and milk and get out of here, out of this cave before
right.
whatever it is that lives here gets back." But Odysseus said, "I don't know, man. I kind of want to stick around and see this thing." And he
Yeah,
tells them he wants to wait and see. So he kind of brings that hell on them, and a bunch of them die, because of that. So that whole thing of toying with the edge of intrigue, like the opening poem you read, that you sort of get addicted to, danger or whatever. You see that in Odysseus. And then also, and this is the last thing I'll say too, just about his spiritedness. He says there's a vengefulness in his defeating Polyphemus. It's not simply winning. He gets angry. He gets mad that Polyphemus is killing his men. And
mm,
my translation says he prayed for and plotted for what's the best way, what's the way that I could hurt him most. How could I hurt Polyphemus most? And
yeah,
that's how it came to him. Take his eye, out. So that's like a vengeful
yeah,
thing. So he's passionate. He's a passionate warrior, spirited warrior. And so for those reasons, I would say the obvious is this is like a character dump, of Odysseus, and it would be a great chapter for composition writing, for rhetorical exercises in which you do write characterization, which students should learn to write. It's a great form of narration, and
mm,
there's an analytical way to go through it and build out a character, and you can get all the material you needed. I think from
yeah,
this chapter. So I don't know. I'll throw that out there. It's sort of obvious, but I would say, is that the essence of this book?
yeah. Just one thing, if I could dovetail off what you were just going through, that it's fascinating. So Jonathan Shea mentions this in his book, that the first three things that happen after 10 years of hand-to-hand combat are
Yeah,
raping and pillaging, are drugs, and violence. And
yeah,
he
yeah.
makes clear that whatever's ambiguous about war trauma, what isn't ambiguous are sex, violence, and drugs are the three most common ways a warrior self-medicates after war trauma.
Wow.
So he makes the point. He say, I'm not comfortable diagnosing literary characters, but he makes the point
Yeah,
that Homer, deep in his heart and mind, knew the kind of brokenness that ensues after
yeah.
long-term exposure to combat. And there wasn't clinical
Mm.
apparatus or terminology, but he knew it almost spiritually enough to have Odysseus's very next moments be these moments.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and he
That's
says
really
it
great.
not, and I agree with this. The more I read this poem deeply, the more I'm trying not to judge someone who's really, I think, awful. But you know, we all know people in real life who are on the surface kind of terrible, and then if any of us take the time to dig into their life story, man, sometimes there's such awful things that have occurred that you think to yourself, man, it's amazing they do what they can do, honestly, you know?
Yeah. Right.
Um, and I
Right.
think Odysseus is like a highly dramatic version, obviously, of that. So again, to me, that's part of like the moral ambiguity that makes him fascinating, aside from his intellect, which you just talked about, is that
Hmm.
he's intellectually complex, but I think he's morally complex. I think you can, on the one hand,
Yeah.
say, here's a list of reprehensible things he does. And on the other hand, a list of heroic things he does. And somewhere in the middle, you look at the pain and the
Yeah.
separation from his loved ones and everything else, and you think, just the fact that he can like get up and walk around is kind of amazing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So I think
That's
of it
true.
in those
And
terms.
that in that he's articulate about many of his character traits. So he's alive to
Yeah,
them
yeah,
and reflects on them
yeah,
and articulates, speaks them. It's the louts among us who just plow on with our vices, and just are unaware of them or uninterested in examining them. And he does to some degree, you know,
yeah.
um, maybe not as much as we would want, but he does. Yeah. Okay. That's pretty good. Do you have do you have a subtle point, Jay, to make
I really like
from
the
this?
font of this chapter. No, so Helvetica. I'm a sucker for Helvetica. No, it's for me. It's a subtle point. It's not going to the point I pick isn't going to surprise you. Um,
Okay.
it's Odysseus revealing his identity. It's actually not even a subtle point. But let me just read Emily Wilson's translation of these like
Yeah.
5 lines. So this is Odysseus can get away and save the rest of his men and escape. And he's played that trick, which is so clever, calling himself No Man.
Right. Right.
And in ancient Greek, it's me space tis, metis, no man. But the word
Yeah.
metis as one word means cleverness, which is Odysseus's characteristic. So
Mm-hmm.
so Homer's like smirking, like he's playing a joke with the word.
Right.
Here, Odysseus says, Cyclops, if any mortal ask you how your eye was mutilated and made blind, say that Odysseus, the city sacker, Laertes' son, who lives in Ithaca, destroyed your sight. And
Right.
I think, I'm reading her translation of the Iliad now, and I think in the Iliad, this is a moment where Odysseus and Achilles' lives, as wildly different as they are, intersect. Achilles
Oh.
is an absolutely superhuman killing machine. Odysseus is not, and you said it in your summary. He's not even
Mm-hmm.
particularly violent against Polyphemus. He operates on the level of ideas and intellect and cunning. Achilles just is an efficient killing machine. Achilles
Yeah.
Achilles, there's a choice. He's given a choice. You could be fated to live a long time without glory or a short time with glory at the end. And
Yeah.
he chooses a short time dying heroically in battle, and your name being, you living forever through your reputation, through Kleos. And I
Yes.
think sailing away from the island of the Cyclopses is Odysseus's very similar moment where he can choose live somewhat anonymously. No one will know how you
Huh.
heroically saved yourself from the Cyclops, or own the moment with your name, not realizing you're damning yourself and killing everybody that's serving with you right now. But
Huh.
I think he has that moment. I think there's a moment maybe all warriors face, at least warriors on this level, which is
Huh.
um, survive anonymously or risk a ton for the hope of glory.
Hmm.
It's interesting that Odysseus gets a version of what Achilles got, that choice, and he chose what he chose here.
That's pretty
So
good. I like
I was
that. I
just
like
thinking
that
that.
parallel. No, that's good. I think it's really good, and that is a good subtle point because he practically gives him his street address in that scene, right? He
Oh
tells
my
him where
gosh.
to where
I
to
like
mail
long
the
walks to
bomb.
the beach. I'm an O positive blood type. My social security number. I mean, it's all of
Yeah,
it.
right, right. It's like
Yeah.
Ted Kaczynski. He does the research for Ted. You can send me that package bomb. You know, hey, it's going out to his mailbox, and boom, love.
Yep.
Cyclops, because yeah, he lays it all out there. But it's a good point about that because it's also true.
Yeah.
And it's an enormous risk to put yourself out there and die. Even in contemporary society, I think about that. People who become public voices on various topics, who take that step out, or seek it, and it's dangerous. It's
Oh,
dangerous out there. You get burned. But I think it fits with Odysseus's. Well, it does fit with Odysseus's character. There's no question about it, and that maybe just puts an exclamation point on the point I was making about this is a chapter about his character. Maybe focus on that part where he risks all of their lives in the present moment, not to mention in the future, while his men are saying, "Why don't you shut up? You're giving the Cyclops our bearing so he can throw a rock at us and kill us." But Odysseus is like, "No, no, actually, I'm not going to." And
right.
he pushes it. He pushes it and brings down destruction on
But he
their
wants to live forever, Paul.
head.
No, that's what it is.
In
Odysseus can't live forever if his name isn't attached to his deeds. That's it.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right. And that's how he's going to be known. That's true. That's true. And it's also how he's going to risk dying. He does make it back, but the curse does come true technically because Polyphemus says, if he's fated to make it home, if destiny intends that he shall see his roof again among his family and his fatherland, let that day be far away, let dark years be in between, and let him lose all of his companions and return under strange sail to bitter days at home.
Hmm.
Man, that's a
All of it.
description of
Check, check,
exactly what
check, check.
happens.
Yep.
Right. Check all the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Check all the boxes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
What's
good.
your subtle passage, Paul?
I think I kind of already wandered into it. My subtle
Okay.
point was, and so we can maybe move on past it, but just that in this chapter we see, I think it was a point I was making, that this establishes the book as a humanist, a great humanist text. That's why it's, I think, in the literary canon, that this book is about Odysseus. It's kind of the point we were just saying, and he stands on the prow of the ship, boasting of his deed in the face of in the face of Polyphemus hurling missiles at them. This and just about everything else that happens in this book. This book is about Odysseus, and by extension about humanity. I think he's supposed to be a great human character.
Mm-hmm.
Great in the sense of not necessarily not perfect, not flawless, not great in that sense, but great and comprehensive, great and compelling, great in something that draws you in, like we're saying at the beginning, draws in poets and artists, readers and students, across time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a point you might not land on until this book, book 9, I think. And so
Fair.
it's there. And I guess I wanted
Yeah.
to say that for my subtle but really, really important point about this. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that's what I
good.
got. That's what I got for that. Yeah.
Well, I have a lingering question, and
All
I
right.
I mentioned it quickly earlier, but my lingering question is, what do we make of Odysseus's real thoughts about his circumstances as he's telling the Phaeacians his life story after the war? Are we
Okay.
getting something like the unvarnished truth, like you'd get in a Shakespearean soliloquy, except with like wine and meat and togas,
Yeah.
um, or is there something more complicated going on?
Hmm.
I feel like at this stage, what Odysseus really thinks, like the core of who he is, feels hard to grasp. Like, I don't know if I can just listen and go, okay, all of this is true because he's talking out loud. Like, I don't know. I have no idea. So I feel
Yeah.
like there's an eggshells-ish component to being the reader right now, or being in the court of the Phaeacians also.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
okay. Like I always say it's a book 9. You don't have to know everything. I'm just saying, like,
Right. Right.
I don't know about what's going on. I don't know what
Yeah.
I don't know what Odysseus is actually. Wouldn't it be great to like occasionally have a Shakespearean soliloquy in books that exist before Shakespeare? Like, wouldn't it be great having a Beowulf one? Wouldn't it be great having an Achilles or Odysseus, like where it's just him, but he's like thinking out loud for a page? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Like, it's really hard to know because all these moments are public moments,
Right.
right? You know. So that's my
Yeah.
question.
And it's uh mine's kind of related. It's in that same scene. And I want to ask about the telling of the story to the crowd who's listening to them. There's a conflict in the story that I don't fully get, which is that the Phaeacians are going to be the ones who take him home. They're going to sail him home. They've already promised to do it, and we'll get there. Whatever, book 13 or 14, whatever it is, they're going to sail him home. Um, but the Phaeacians are descendants of Poseidon, right?
Right.
Alcinous is his grandson or something, is what he tells them.
Yep.
They pray to Poseidon. I'm wondering, as he's telling this story, and like you're talking about choosing which stories to tell, what are all the Phaeacians thinking when he gets the story and he says, and then Polyphemus called out to his father Poseidon and said, "Father, avenge me." Are they all going like, "Wait a minute, what?" And he's telling it like, I don't know, triumphantly maybe. And then I poked his eye out, and then I ran away and I put it right in his face. And then they find out that he did this to their sponsoring god,
Yep.
and they're all listening. Why is there this inherent conflict? And I know there's a prediction thing about, they're aware, the Phaeacians are aware that they're going to, offend Poseidon, and he's going to build walls up around around their island, whatever. But still, I don't get the point of, I don't know if it's the irony or the conflict in the fact that he gets a ride home from Poseidon's people. I don't really know what to make of that. And so it starts right here in this story. I mean, he's telling a story that should come to an extremely awkward moment.
Right.
It's like he's, it's like he's in, he's in a room full of Catholics and doesn't know it. And he's like, and then I burned the Catholic Church down. Cause those Catholics, we don't, and everyone in there is like, oh, wait a minute. What are you talking about?
Yep.
I mean, he's pitting himself against the people who are going to help them, and they end up helping them, being his
Right.
his ride home. But he's telling how he's deeply, deeply offended those people. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. Why is that there? Why is that a part of the story? It grabs my attention. At least it doesn't have to be the case, So
And
I
particularly,
don't know.
Paul,
Never looked it up.
we're in the hands of someone who's really good at lying, or at least leaving stuff out. We're going to see that throughout the poem. So I just find it peculiar that he doesn't make different choices here. I mean, he doesn't have to tell them that Polyphemus is connect. Well, I guess over time he does, but I don't know. Like he has no problem being slimy and elusive elsewhere. So it's just
Right.
interesting. I don't know. Maybe part of me wonders, like, the Phaeacians aren't fighters. The Phaeacians have
Right.
offered, their princess to him. He's in such good stead as this story begins. Maybe he just feels supremely confident that he could, make fun of Alcinous's mother, and it wouldn't matter at this point. Your mother wears Trojan army boots or something. But you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, where does this
I
confidence
guess.
come? Where in so many other moments in the poem he knows to lie?
Right. Right. I don't
You
know.
know?
Because that sort of careless overconfidence does not sound like him either. He's really, he's usually
Yeah,
very,
yeah,
very careful. So I'm not
yeah,
sure. It makes me feel like, again, like and maybe it's just a part of the story, but maybe there may be something I'm really missing, here about understanding the context, the circumstance. And
yeah,
it is the kind of thing that would drive me to dig into the cultural part of the book, to get beneath that. It's something that it feels like is not in the literary part of the book so much.
yeah,
99% of the time I've spent in this book, I've treated it like a book, like
yeah.
a story you can stay between the covers of and get everything you need. But there feels like there are these moments sometimes where I need something, outside of, not a lot, but sometimes.
Sure.
So I throw that
Yeah,
out there. It's kind of a neat part, and maybe it's those little compelling little breadcrumb trail nuggets, that you sort of follow through the story that aren't the story, but are just maybe a facet of great writing. I take it also as just an element of really, really good writing that's not just so clean cut and
yeah,
anesthetized that everything just works out perfectly. That's a little bit
right.
boring in the end. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is
well,
the chapter. This is the chapter that I think, read superficially by maybe teachers who just have to do it in an obligatory way but don't like it. This
yeah,
would be very much a box checking hero's journey, monsters, good guys, bad guys. But I mean, if you actually read the words, which is a
yeah,
good idea when you're dealing with, books, uh, it isn't that. It's just
yeah.
you know, things. This book is a lot like Odysseus in that things are very rarely what they appear to be.
Yeah, yeah, that's
You
right.
know,
And then again, there it is. There's another vote perversely for it as an excerpt, because
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
right there.
yeah.
It's right there in it.
I like
But you
what you
don't
said,
know that.
Paul, about. I like what you said, Paul, about this book being almost a microcosm of the Odyssey and of Odysseus himself.
Yeah.
That's a good paper topic at the end of reading it. The whole
Yes.
the whole epic. You could say,
Right.
you know. Anyway,
Well, it's true. I mean, but you kind of don't know it unless you've read the rest of the book,
you have to read the
sort of
whole thing.
weirdly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But it
yeah.
is, it is. Well, all right. Hey, that feels pretty good, and a good, maybe a good stopping place there. I
Sure.
really enjoyed reading back through that, again for this podcast, and I did, like you
Yeah.
said, I read each of the words, and that would be I think, unfortunately, it doesn't go without saying. More and more, our students are given so many opportunities. They've had it for a long time, the sort of Spark Notes version, but now with AI opportunities and things like that, just getting away and actually getting in the headspace of a physical book and reading
Yeah.
every word on the page. It's a transformative experience, and so I think anything we all do as teachers to help make that palatable, to put that in front of their face, to give class time over to it. I don't
Yep.
always have a lesson. A lot of times, I the lesson is we're going to sit and read today, and I
Yeah,
think that's a good thing. Good
absolutely.
thing. Give them that time. So,
Absolutely.
all right, Jay. Thanks a ton.
Thanks,
We'll see you
Paul.
again on book 10.
Yeah. I
All right.
might start singing Frank Sinatra's song Witchcraft if you're lucky. We'll see.
Well, we'll have to open with
Sinatra
that.
has not made an appearance on the podcast, and we're due. That's my prediction.
And we need an intro and an outro, so that
Well,
could be it.
okay. This is a longer conversation, but we'll definitely talk about this.
All right. At least we have some options here. All right. Talk to you later.
Bye, Paul.